Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave. We'd love to hear your feedback. Where did we get it right? Where did we get it wrong? Where do you agree, disagree? You can do that on Rumble. You can do that on unsilentpodcast.com or various and sundry social media channels. So, fun times in 2025, Brian, isn't it?
Yeah, I've seen a number of memes posted on social media about people wanting a refund so far in 2025.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, it's a momentous time, I think. Just watching the news is hard to keep up.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big story since I saw you last has got to be the California fires. And I got to say, you and I recorded a week ago today, and I walked out of my office after we were done, and I'm watching the news, and I'm seeing all these, I don't know how many thousands of acres it is now. It's, multiple tens of thousands of acres at this point. But there was a moment where I said to my wife, I've heard about the 1906 San Francisco fire, and you and I talk about this stuff all the time. Like, you and I regularly talk about, we think we're more sophisticated, more evolved, and we've grown out of these things. It never occurred to me that we could have like a 1906 style fire again. I legitimately was like, I can't believe we're having the same thing, only worse in our era. I really thought we'd kind of outgrown that. So that was the first thing for me. And then as it's unfolded, watching what I would call incompetence or misplaced priorities, mismanagement, whatever. And there's some things I can talk about on that. And then the fallout on people arguing and the tribalism has really come front and center in this situation. And I find myself having a hard time navigating. And here's what I mean. It's a natural disaster. Okay. And they're called natural disasters because they're out of our control. They're naturally, like hurricanes, things like that. The wind was just right, and this was just right, and the perfect storm for this kind of thing. That's absolutely true. And also, there was gross incompetence, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And also, the people suffering don't need to be lectured about how there's gross incompetence as their house was burned down. Like, all these things are happening at once. And I just find myself just feeling bad for everybody involved. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, and like you, I was thinking about how could this occur? I mean, this area is one of the richest areas in the country.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, we got your average home is probably a couple $1 million in the Pacific Palisades area, where
at least, I would say, at least
some that are much more. I mean, every now and then when I can't sleep, I watch $1 Million Real Estate, which is people in the LA area. There's two shows. There's one in the LA area, and it puts, it's a reality show, different real estate agents against each other selling, multi-million-dollar homes in that. And there's one for New York as well. And I get to thinking about the homes that are in that area. The people pay near the Hollywood Hills, they'll pay millions of dollars for a small chunk of land on the house. And you've got this massive, massive investment area there. And how could that be so utterly unprotected as, it looks like a war zone. I mean, it looks worse than a war zone. It looks like something out of Eastern Ukraine or something like that. So that was one of the responses that came to mind. The other one was, it's just a reinforcement of the short-term mentality of humans, and in particular of politicians, because it's I'm sure those people are paying most of them are paying tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in property taxes. And yet there's fire hydrants without water. There's reservoirs without water. The ironic thing is they live next to the biggest body of water in the world, the Pacific Ocean. I realize you can't use it for the salt in it. But we're a relatively technologically sophisticated society. You would think that there would be a way to maybe desalinate it enough so that you could use it for prevent a disaster like this. So yeah, I think all of those things coming out at once have been kind of staggering. Now the question is, and you see people that are normally disconnected from the realities of people's lives, like you and mine. I mean, and you and I have pretty good lives, so we're. So I'm not saying.
I mean, I don't have a Mercedes, but I'm doing all right.
Yeah, but you're doing okay. You can afford a haircut, so that's good. Never mind. Sorry. But so the point is, though, that a lot of these people that own, if you own a $5 million house and it's in a gated community in the Hollywood Hills, you're probably not too concerned about paying your mortgage, your taxes, and you're not concerned about eggs being $12 a dozen. So you might be a little bit disconnected from the realities of the average working class blue collar American. But now they were brought face to face with loss, disaster, things that they normally don't have to suffer in their lives. Is that going to change their outlook to be a more practical outlook? And California has had and currently has a very unpractical, unrealistic, just sort of disconnected utopian outlook to a great extent. And that's one of the reasons a lot of this happened, I believe, that the mismanagement that you're talking about, forest mismanagement, water mismanagement, fire mismanagement, the whole thing. Do you think this will bring enough of that strata of society out of their utopian haze to make some practical changes? What do you think?
Well, I've been, as long as you and I have been doing this podcast, I've been saying that I don't believe things will change until people who are removed, like you're describing, suffer the consequences of the decisions firsthand. And I've been pretty consistent with that, I think, and my opinion of that has not changed. If it's not this, I think it takes something like this to do that. And there's so many bizarre things about this. For example, how long ago were the Maui fires? Was that like a year ago? Not even a year ago?
A year ago?
Maybe. Okay, so it was a while, but it was a very similar situation. It wasn't exactly the same, but very similar. The winds picked up. In their case, there's supposedly, I don't know, there's power lines that were trees that were not trimmed back around power lines for the sake of ecological reasons or whatever that was. Again, I don't know all the details, but Maui and Malibu, not that different as far as like real estate values and also political beliefs and all that kind of stuff. And something just like stuck out to me. There was a time, and I didn't take the time to find the clip, but the guy in Maui who was in charge of water and like doling out like where water goes just under normal circumstances, not necessarily just in fires, but he said something like, we look at all things through the lens of equity, including how we distribute water.
Right.
And then the people in California not too long ago had said basically the same thing.
Yeah.
And so the pragmatic part of me says, well, how could you not correlate, see the consistency there in we're using this criteria to make decisions, equity, and this bad outcome happens, and therefore perhaps we should look at how our decision-making priorities are placed, right? So I don't know if it'll be this. I think it certainly will move some. And already, like the owner of the LA Times has come out and like, hey, you know what? I endorsed Karen Bass, but that was a mistake. Like, I think that Elon Musk kind of put started the ball rolling, and it's gained momentum. More and more people, especially after the election, it became safe to do so.
Yeah.
More progressive folks are now calling out, hey, I'm all for, equal this and equal that. However, we also have to ... whatever.
Right.
And I think this will just give that change and movement momentum. Yeah. I don't know if it's enough. But I do think that this is the kind of thing I think this is what shapes the fourth turning in many ways.
Yeah. These
kinds of things happen, and whether it's another fire or it's something different, a different kind of whatever, but they expose the in my opinion, improper criteria upon which we make decisions, which lead to really horrible results. And they take a bad situation to make it infinitely worse, or 100x worse or 10x worse or whatever. And I think you would have to be pretty ardent or secluded or wealthy enough where now a $20 million house going away, yeah, that really sucks, but I don't care. I got two others, and I got one in Spain and I got one in St. Thomas, and I got, it's not, there's that element where this is not that big of a hit to them financially, but I think there's plenty probably where it is, and I think minds will be changed.
Yeah, and I think you're probably going to have a couple of different camps in that regard. I think there's going to be, in terms of minds being changed and people changing their own minds, and also people looking at it from the outside in, changing their minds. I think on one hand, you're going to have a part of society saying, well, it's just rich people who lost their homes anyway, so who really cares? I mean, I remember during the Seattle riots, I was talking to somebody, he's like, well, they're all insured. It doesn't matter, when businesses get destroyed, which, was pretty infuriating to hear from somebody. On the other hand, the entire liberal/progressive project, more, liberal, it's really both, liberal/progressive project is all about how people feel. Now, if you look at somebody, whoever they are, that's just lost their house, that their entire, not just their house, but their, their photos, their history, their family heirlooms that go back 100 years, their kids, just everything that kind of identified them with the age that they live in, it's all gone. I mean, that's pretty heart-wrenching. I mean, whether you're a multimillionaire or whether you're just an employee at a blue collar job, that's pretty heart wrenching. So I think what that kind of thing will probably affect more people than the kind of cynical, well, they're just all rich people anyway, type of thing. So I think, and these things are never really all one direction or all the other, but I think it'll be a bigger move, it seems to me, towards the sort of compassion that is purported to be on the liberal progressive side than it will sort of the cynical side. That's my guess, at least.
Yeah, I don't know how much again, I hate to sound too cynical, but I guess I kind of am. I don't know how much I would expect people who've gone through this to have an enhanced ability to have empathy for Hurricane Helene victims, for example, in North Carolina. I don't expect there to be much movement there. I do think that people will say, okay, we were staunchly in the camp of we make decisions through the lens of equity and whatever. Right. And this thing happened, and people around me in influential positions like the owner of LA Times, things like that, are saying they're making it okay to say, hey, this is messed up. This is not how this is supposed to go. And there's no shortage of little indications along the way. I'll give you an example of what I mean. So about a year or two ago, I listened. You know who Victor David Hanson is?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Hoover Institute, lifelong Californian, is a teacher at some prestigious school at Stanford. Okay, but owns a family farm that's been in his family for 5 generations or some version of that, whatever. He knows that area very well. He's very educated. He's very smart. He's very plugged in. And 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, whenever it was, I was listening to his podcast. He was talking about how hundreds of years ago, or at least decades ago, our ancestors in California had built this system to retain water that only came in every 50 or 60 years, but it came in massive amounts, but it only came every few decades. And so they built this aqueduct and dam system and whatever to retain that water for agriculture and all the stuff that they needed it for.
Right.
And somewhere around a couple of decades ago, the people in charge in California said, we don't need that stuff anymore. We're in a drought. We don't need those things. And they didn't look historically and see that these rains came every 50 or 60 years. So they removed all those things that had been built by people who didn't have backhoes and earth movers and things like that did it pretty old school methodology. They removed that stuff. So last year and the year before, when those big rains came right on cue every 50 or 60 years, all that water went in the Pacific Ocean.
Oh, yeah.
There are a number of little things like that are just common knowledge that are they're not arguable. This dam was there and now it's not, and therefore we didn't have the water. Therefore the reservoir was dry. Therefore when the fire hit, the fire hydrant is dry. I think you would have to be really locked into an ideology to overlook things like that. And it's not like that one thing. There's a number of things like that. I think you have to be so blindly locked in ideology to overlook that it has to it has to change the minds, I think.
Well, yeah, and I think you got it right. You have to be locked into the ideology so that you're distracted and think that nothing else is important. And so
or convince yourself this would have happened no matter. There's nothing we could have done. It was a perfect storm of wind and whatever, and no amount of water could have saved us. Like that, I think there's probably plenty of people who are like thinking that way.
Well, and I think people, what Rahm Emanuel's, we go to that before, never let a good crisis go to waste. So plenty of people will and have said, well, you see, it's all climate change. It's 100% climate change. And therefore we need more taxes, more power, more restrictions, more centralized authority. Maybe we don't need more centralized authority now because Trump's in charge of the country. So, but so they don't like that, which puts them in a real conundrum because they're for centralized authority unless it's not theirs. But yes, I think that's a big part of it is that's the response will be not a retrospective response to say, well, they did the forest management people have been saying for years, we need to clear out the underbrush, we need to create fire breaks, we need to fully supply the water system, we need to have
perhaps stop homeless people from starting fires. I mean, that would be a place you might consider starting as well. I mean, not that they're like handing them torches and things like that. I don't mean that, but they've had a pretty lackadaisical posture towards crime.
Oh, absolutely. And when it goes back to that notion that when you don't take reality seriously, reality will force itself on you. And that's exactly what happened here. Reality always wins. Reality always fights back and bites you. And so I'm hopeful that enough people will see this and see that. Well, I think that one of the things that was indicative of the age that we live in is I saw. Did you see that interview, or not interview, but that video of that woman confronting Gavin Newsom outside of his SUV, and he's offering all these slick platitudes. Well, I'm on the phone with the president right now.
Yeah,
we're gonna be, and we're
gonna do everything we can to help you. I think was his. If I'm pretty close on that. Paraphrasing a little bit, but pretty close. Yeah,
we're gonna do everything. And she said, "Well, what are you doing now?"
Yeah.
Doing right now.
And she said, I don't believe you.
Yes, exactly, which is beautiful. That was just so beautiful. Well, and then, to hear, well, I've got a plan. Anytime I hear a politician say, well, I've got a plan, I've got a 5-point plan, I've got a simple.
Hold your wallet.
Yeah. Grab your wallet, run the other direction. So I think, especially as you see the celebrities and the people that were previous cheerleaders for, the state of California's enlightened posture on these things, I think possibly we'll see some change in some of that. Well, and like you said, the LA Times owner, the doctor, some of the positions he's taking, I do think part of that is that, as you said earlier, it's been safe, or it's safe now to say that, maybe we should think about forest management a little bit more, and maybe we can think about equity a little bit less. And
it's also becoming more and more okay to hold people accountable to actual consequences. and the consequence is a thing that's been being dodged for years now, in my opinion. Like, for example, when the Trump assassination attempt happened in Butler, the lady in charge of the Secret Service kept saying, I'm accountable. I'm accountable. I'm accountable. The word she never used was consequences.
Right.
Never was the word consequences uttered in that hearing. It was all I'm accountable, but there was never any utterance or recognition that there should be consequences.
Yeah.
And so we have a culture now where shame is not allowed and criticizing people and outcomes is not allowed if you check certain demographic boxes or ideological boxes, things like that. But this is on a scale where I think that has to be overcome. Yeah. Now, on the flip side, though, I see just as much stuff that pisses me off on the other side. Like people, quote unquote, on our side, who are like, screw them, they need this. Like they voted for it. Like that kind of and like. I fully believe that it takes these kinds of events to shake people out of their blind ideology. I do believe that. It doesn't mean I welcome it. It doesn't mean I'm happy these people got their stuff ruined and like their pets died and people died and houses that people work their asses off their whole lives to get. Like I'm not excited about this. So it's kind of one of those situations that I find myself in a lot nowadays over the last few years, which is they're all wrong, and I don't mean like I'm right and they're wrong. I don't mean in that sense, but yes, the people who supported this ideology led to this outcome, they're wrong. And the people who are like cheering that, yeah, well, you got what you voted for, they're wrong too. Like neither of those is the right path. I mean, but the tribalism has just come front and center in this thing.
Well, both paths, both sides in that scenario are selfish. That's a problem. Is both sides are selfish. On the one side, it's on the progressive side, it's got to be our way. You're a bunch of rubes and you're losers and we're going to win. We're going to crush you. On the other side, it's like, ha ha, it came back to bite you. You got yours, thumbing your nose at. Both of those are like just entrenched tribal positions. The position where I am and want to be and think, and you and I both at, I think is, man, that really sucks. It's sad for those folks. I don't wish that on anybody. And I hope this brings more recognition of what can be done in the future so that this kind of thing doesn't happen. So it's not, I'm right, you're wrong, and now you don't have a home to live in. That's a horrible place to be. That's a horrible. Yeah. And I see that online too. Social media, more and more come to believe that it's just a toxic thing, in all of our lives. Because it's like that just jumps right out. It's like, well, yeah, the rich celebrities got theirs,
Yeah,
that's just,
I think one of the I listen to Adam Carolla fairly regularly, and he has a podcast I catch here and there, and he's a super smart guy. He's like maybe the original guy in California who's like been anti a lot of this stuff, and he comes from the before he was a famous entertainer, comedian, podcaster, TV guy. He worked in the trades. He did construction. And he talked about the day after, and now he lives in a condo in Malibu, and I think his made it, but everything around it is gone. Pretty much is how that went. He talked about the real pain is going to come when these people have to try to rebuild and they have to go through the permitting process.
Yeah,
and navigating all these bureaucratic layers of quote unquote protection that have been put in place that make it nearly impossible to build in some parts of California. His theory is that's when the hearts and minds are going to change, is when they go to rebuild their $25 million house and they want it done in 6 months and it takes 5 years.
Right.
There's instances, Suzanne Summers and her husband gave up. They many years ago, they gave up and moved to Palm Springs because it was too hard to try to build on their own house.
Right.
And so there's layers of this. It's not just the fires. It's not just the reservoirs and the fire hydrants. Now they have to go through this brutal process of even trying to get a home built on land that they own that will have coastal commission restrictions and environmental restrictions. And you have to do this kind of test and that kind of thing. And he cited an example where somebody wanted to build a swimming pool, and it has to be double holed because you can't have water from a swimming pool leaching into the ground. It might find its way to the ocean and kill the fish. And all these, there's just layers upon layers upon layers of that stuff. And you have the people in charge who are either ignorant or incompetent or don't want any different outcome. Like, yeah, well, it really sucks you're going to go through that, but it's California. We got to keep it beautiful. Like the fish have to be the priority. And like, there's many layers of this pain that's going to happen. But again, I don't want to go so far as I haven't quite found a balance I can articulate. I'm not happy this happened.
Yeah.
And I recognize and believe that this kind of thing has to happen to change people's minds. And I don't want to celebrate it.
Right.
But I also these are the kind of things that are likely to mark turning points. And so long term, this is kind of what's necessary. And again, I'm not eager about it, I'm not excited about it, but I also just kind of appreciate this is how it works. And so I don't know how to articulate the balance that I'm finding myself in.
Well, I think I totally understand. That's the story of humanity. We only overcome, and we only great things happen when we're threatened and we're in dire circumstances. Yeah. I mean, we're for whatever reason God designed it this way. You either overcome in life or you wither away and die. I mean, on a very practical level, I take care of my dad. I've got to push him every day. He's 96 years old. Then can be 97 next month. I have to push him every day to walk. And it would be so easy for him just to sit in his comfortable chair. He's got this great chair, he's got warm blanket, the whole thing. But if he doesn't experience discomfort, he'll die faster. So that's really the story of humanity overall. If we get too comfortable, and let's face it, we're in the most comfortable nation on the planet in all of human history.
And the most comfortable nation in the most comfortable time ever in human history that we know of. Yeah,
exactly. And so that kind of comfort can lead us to becoming lazy and falling apart and unhealthy and all of those types of things. So you never want to see this kind of disaster. You don't want to see the disaster of World War II or the founders of the country. They really didn't want to go to war with England. I mean, they were to some extent patriotic English people that were like, but we have to do this. That's what comes of this. And now, and the other thing.
So if you were the Tsar of the United States, starting in a month, and I'm not saying that because Trump's inauguration is on Monday. I'm honestly not saying it, but a month from now, Dave's in charge of everything. How do you balance these two competing things? You've got California that has now, in my opinion, has years, if not a couple of decades of making really bad decisions, mismanaging money. They have the highest tax rate in the country, but they're constantly in a budget deficit, that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then bad things happen and the federal government bails them out.
Yeah.
Right. And then they just go back to doing more of the thing where they overtax and overspend more than they overtax, and they have budget deficits and they run out of money and something bad happens and the federal government bails them out. At some point, you have to not bail them out, because at some point you have to stop doing the things that you're doing to lead down this path. However, all of these things that happen, these are horrible. Like, this is a horrible thing. Like, if you're the czar and you draw the line here and say, you know what, we've done this 5 times now in the last 25 years of bailing you guys out. You've got to make some commitment to changing how you do things in order to get that money. No different than you would do with your brother who borrows money all the time, or your kid who can't keep a job, or whatever it is. Like, at some point there's a line and you have to say, I will help you this time with these conditions. Right. But if you do that, holy smokes, do you look bad? Like the worst natural disaster in California probably ever that we know of, on a scale that was hardly imaginable. Like you said, you look at the photos, the aerial photos, and they put one of Hiroshima side by side with Pacific Palisades, and they looked the same. It was horrible. Like, what do you do, Dave? If you're in charge, how do you handle this?
Well, you know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of a perennially not performing employee. So you and I are business people, and sometimes you get employees that don't perform well. Well, what do? You put them on a corrective action plan. The corrective action plan has a limited period of time on it. It has, you're not firing them, not today at least, you're not firing them. Yep. So you go to California and you say, California, you're on a corrective action plan. And we want 2 things. One, we're going to give you some parameters, going to give you some basic parameters. You're going to come back to me with how you're going to fix these things. And my help to you and your continued employment, so to speak, is based on your performance against this plan. So, and I think part of that too is, a corrective action plan doesn't feel good when you're an employee who gets put on it. It feels like, I don't want to do this. It's inconvenient. It makes me look bad, all of that. But at the same time, it is the most compassionate thing you can do for an employee that, at least the first time out, is not performing well, because their performance is going to improve, or else they're going to be gone. So same thing with California.
But Dave, what if the employee is having performance issues because he's distracted by a quadriplegic daughter he has to take care of, and a mom who is a drug addict who moved in with him, and the reason he has poor performance is because of things that are just out of his control? Like, I can't help it that this is the way this is, and they're dire circumstances that are really emotional in nature. Yep. It kind of feels like that kind of a situation where, without the nuance and details of like what leads to the performance issues, like, okay, you just put him on a performance plan. But when it's his kid causing the problem who's a quadriplegic, and this is my made up example here, that adds a different level of complexity.
Well, it does. It certainly does, and you try to have as much compassion as you can for the situation, but you also have to look at the entire, enterprise. So you have to look at the
Yeah.
entire California enterprise and say, you guys got all these problems, and they're real problems, and you're going to have to rebuild. And by the way, you're not going to be able to get insurance because the insurance companies already bailed on California, and guess what? They're going to really bail on California now. They're, I don't, who's going to be left. So there's real issues, and the corrective action plan for California is not a panacea, and it's going to be really painful. There's no doubt it's going to be painful. But you're going to have to. But see, this is where leadership comes in, right? I mean, you have to be a leader. You got to be able to look at that difficult situation straight in the eye and say, "It's going to hurt." You're not going to like it. This is going to hurt. It's going to be tough. And you and those around you might suffer some as a result of this. You're not going to die, but
Yeah.
you're probably going to suffer some. And so therefore, but there's no other choice. There's no other alternative. So you're going to have to do this. So the federal government, the aid for the federal government really needs to be contingent on putting together plans that are common sense, are long term. And I'll tell you what. Have you been watching what's going on in Argentina with Javier Milei?
Yeah, bits and pieces here. Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm following it intently, but I pick up bits and pieces every couple of days. Yeah.
Well, so I'm a geek about that kind of thing. So they had a utterly dysfunctional country, economic collapse and inflation, and they bounce between this and that and the other thing. Well, and he came in and I'm quite a fan of his. I mean, the liberal establishment doesn't really like him much, but he came in and he put some real painful, cutting restrictions on, and they have a budget surplus all of a sudden. Well, but he took the leadership role of saying, we're going to get this ship right. We're going to get it on track. And the fascinating thing was, and this is, I've seen this in a lot of both organizations and when we do this as a country. You remember, you're younger than I am, but you remember when we came out of the stagflation of the 70s into the 80s and Reagan and all that. Well,
I heard about it, but I was 6 years old, Dave.
You remember from history. Well, I was paying attention when I was 6. What's wrong with you? But so the point is that these things, we see how deep these problems are. And like in Argentina, basically it was a failed country. But all of a sudden, you apply some common sense, and it's amazing how fast sometimes things can roar back to being better. Now, it's not utopia in Argentina. Stuff's tough. They've had to cut benefits to people, and people don't like that, and people are going to protest that. All that's going to happen in California if they get some common sense in California too. But there's no other choice, and that's where leadership comes in. If there's leaders that will do it, and not just smarmy, well, I'm on the phone with the president right now from behind his slick back hair and his, I'm attacking him personally. I shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? If we have real leadership, people that'll make the tough decisions and say, we're in it for the long term. This is going to benefit. Then you're going to see change. And only then. That's the only time you're going to see change.
Yeah. No, they've been pretty resistant to any kind of forest management policy changes. There,
for years,
people from across the globe have said, like, the way you guys do this is asinine. Like, you don't clear out any stuff. Like, you have a tinderbox in your forest,
right?
Of course, when you have a fire, and you're going to have fires, pretending like you're not. I guess this is the thing, that pretend like we can solve climate change such that there's no more forest fires. Like, that's just a ludicrous idea to me. And even further ludicrous that California could put in enough emissions programs and things like that, and taxes and whatever, that they could impact the global climate enough to prevent forest fire. That's even more ludicrous. Yeah. So, okay, forest fires are going to happen. You're going to have the drunk guy who goes camping that puts a campfire where he shouldn't. Yep. You're going to have lightning strikes. It's going to happen. How do we mitigate that? And they've been very resistant to any kind of, you live in an area, and I used to, where logging is a major industry. There's experts on this stuff who say what you guys are doing is the exact opposite of what you want to be doing if you want to mitigate forest fires. And they've been very resistant. So it does kind of feel like we're either at or very close to a point where, if you want to get bailed out by the federal government, you have to do some things that most people would consider common sense things and not resist this stuff anymore.
Right. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And now the question is, will there be enough will to do that? And will there be enough backlash to make that happen? Now, I will bet you this. If there's enough backlash against Gavin Newsom, I think Karen Bass as the mayor of LA, I think she's done. I think she's over. I think she's out. I mean, everything about it was wrong. The optics of it, her being in Ghana when all this happened, her statements.
Did you see her interview when she came back at the airport where they asked her those questions? Like, what do you have to say? She just stood there in silence. Like,
did nothing. Yeah, she just was stone faced about it.
I should have saved that clip and we could have played it. But the reporter asking her, like, was it wise for you to be in Ghana? What are you going to do, basically? And like, did you make a mistake and go? And she just stands there and doesn't say a word. And he asked her like 6 or 7 pointed questions. Finally, he's like, "Do you have nothing to say to the citizens?" And she just stands there.
Yeah, and so she's done. The question is Gavin Newsom done as the governor of California? Now he is, I think, he's Clinton-esque. He's actually better Bill Clinton than Bill Clinton was. He is slick. He is cool. He's calm. He speaks well. If a guy like that actually does suffer consequences because of this, if he's recalled or whatever because of the incredibly bad policies that he's presided over in California, then I think you'll get some folks on that side paying attention. If he navigates this and turns this, I've heard, for instance, that he's got this, I don't know if this is true or not, it's just something I saw on social media, so maybe it's false, but he's got the new Marshall Plan for California. And, so what's he doing with that? He's trying to make political hay out of it. He's going to come across as the hero and all that. If that works, then there won't be any changes.
I don't make predictions about many things, certainly not politics, of which I'm no expert, but my gut tells me that if I had to bet on it, I would bet he stays governor, but his aspirations of becoming president are over.
I hope so. He would be awful as president. Yeah, no.
I mean, he's the heir apparent. He's the front runner at this point, wouldn't you say? For 2028 being the Democratic nominee.
Yeah, he looks the part.
We live in a world where Dan Bongino says this all the time. It's snapshots and sound bites.
Yep.
People have very short attention spans. You got 14 syllables and 0.72 seconds of an image to convey a message. And the images you and I are discussing of the Hiroshima-like look of Pacific Palisades and him with his hands in his back pocket standing there looking incompetent and overwhelmed. And the things he says, pointing fingers at Trump, who's not yet president. I don't know if I'm sure he's aware that Trump is not yet president, but maybe not. Or to local officials, like, we're going to figure out why the water reservoir was empty. We're going to ask local officials about that. Those things are writing campaign ads for whoever's going to run for JD Vance in 2028. Right. If he runs, like, the campaign ads are writing themselves at this point.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I wouldn't put it past him and slick politicians to remake themselves, though. I mean, 4 years is a bit of a distance. So it could be that he has some kind of aha moment. And he said, "I realized my mistakes back then, and boy, I've corrected." If he can point to if Gavin Newsom 2028 can point to Gavin Newsom 2025 and say that guy was lousy, but I'm a reformed Gavin Newsom. I'm the reformed Bumbles, from Rudolph.
I think what's going to be interesting to watch over the next few years on with this, not just the California fire situation, but things like this, is after Trump won the election, progressive comedians regained their license to critique progressive politicians.
Right.
Before, it was you could criticize all the Republicans and conservatives you want, but our team is off limits. And that, over the course of maybe 6 or 8 weeks, just kind of evaporated.
Yeah.
And you see very cutting comedians now coming out and like, okay, I did this thing, I'm not going to do it anymore. And so if that holds true and comedians now begin going after progressive politicians, again, opening that door even wider, that it's okay to criticize them legitimately based on legitimate outcomes and failures and whatever. I think that changes the dynamic in a way that will be interesting to watch for sure, because all it takes is more people feeling secure and confident in criticizing them, and that just gains momentum, And as that gains momentum, it becomes harder to stop that momentum. And I think Gavin Newsom's going to be a casualty of that whole movement, where he's going to be brushed aside with a whole cohort of that kind of politician of like, these guys are what got us here. And it's going to become increasingly okay to say so as people navigate things like that permit process and move to Tennessee because they give up on their home in California and their live stream was erased and things like that. And I don't imagine there's going to be a sharp turn on their posture and their talking points. It's going to be this gradual thing. I just don't think they have it in them to keep up with the consumer demand. You know what I mean? Like the citizens' demand for a different approach. I don't think that they're going to be able to navigate that in a sharp enough turn.
That's probably true. Yeah, I think that's probably true. And I think also that cultural shift that you're talking about, like with the comedians. So, since all these people have been off limits for such a long period of time, and now they're not, you've got this fresh field of harvestable stuff. Imagine all the slick back Newsom skits that can be performed when they start getting laughs to that. That's it's like the tide coming in, the tide going out. The tide came in all the way on progressivism, and it's going back out. And you're right, it's not going to be able to be stopped, especially
and those people like Gavin Newsom. Their muscles of defending themselves and rolling with that have atrophied. Like they haven't had to defend themselves against that. I don't see where they have the capacity or the ability to navigate that new landscape. I just not. But what do I know? I mean, I didn't predict that Kamala Harris would be the nominee either. So I know nothing about anything, especially on the political front. But it's going to be interesting to see how Trump handles this, because it is pretty delicate. Yeah. I think that it'd be interesting to see the math. I don't know the math. It'd be interesting to see it. Some of the wealthiest people in the country live in California. Yeah. So presumably they pay a high amount of federal income tax. Yeah. It would be interesting to see, like they put in, how many $100 billion a year or $1 trillion, whatever the number is of tax money to the federal pool. Yeah. How much of California money goes to help other places like Katrina and Helene and tornadoes in Wichita, Kansas, and whatever, versus how much money comes from places like Wichita, Kansas, and Louisiana to bail out California when they have their things. It'd be interesting to see how the math works on that. Is California net? Are they contributing in a net positive way to the collective federal pool, or are they a net negative because they take more than they give in federal taxes? Am I making sense there?
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense.
It'd be interesting to see how that math works out. That for me, if I was the czar, that would be a factor in how I handle this. Like if you guys are over the last 25 years net negative, you're taking more federal money than you're putting in. Right. I'm going to have a higher expectation that you change your policies. If you're net positive and you've actually contributed way more money you've taken in to help other natural disasters, I'd probably be more lenient with that. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. And I suspect it was, I think, and I can't back this up with data, but I suspect California was a net positive contributor. But I suspect now several things will change that. I mean, obviously the amount of bailout money that's going to happen. I also think the amount of people that are going to relocate from California to other places is going to be, there's already a drain of people moving to Texas and Florida and Tennessee and Idaho and other places like that. So I think that will happen. And I also think that as reality enforces its will on California will of necessity have to become more efficient. If that happens, then California could potentially be more per capita productive than it has been when it's fiddling with it. So I think the long-term effect could be positive, but I think in the short term, California is going to be a reverse of what they've been for a long time.
Yeah, and we're almost out of time here, but one of the things that I found most fascinating, just details and facts that emerge with these kinds of catastrophes and things like that. I had no idea that the company that owns Fiji Water was in California. I knew they weren't in Fiji, but I didn't know that they were in California. And the company / family that owns Fiji Water owns like 78% of the fresh water in California or some crazy number. Now, again, all this stuff is from social media. I don't know if it's true or not, but the exact number may not be right. But the underlying fact that this one very, very wealthy family owns a tremendous amount of the freshwater resources in California. Those kinds of things I think are going to have to be squared as well.
Oh, yeah.
As those kinds of things come to light, where, wait a second, this one family owns 400 million acre feet of water or whatever that they keep for their money making operation in agriculture and distributing water. But we have all these restrictions in place for the populace because we're in a water shortage and a drought. Right. I think it's going to be fascinating to watch how all that stuff kind of gets squared.
And if it does get squared, I mean, California is an agricultural powerhouse.
Yeah.
And if they can unleash that again, instead of the crazy stuff they do with particularly water in California, if they can really unleash the agricultural power of California, you can put movie making, you can put tech stuff, you can put it anywhere. But California, the Valley area there is an incredible place. If they can really get it right, then I think there could be a very positive change in California. I hope so.
Yeah. Well, next week when you and I see each other, we'll be post inauguration.
Yeah.
Gonna be interesting.
I'm going to riot, Brian. Are you going to go riot? I think I'm going to go riot. I got to check my schedule, but it sounds like
my calendar is pretty full when it comes to rioting opportunities. I'm pretty lazy and kind of a homebody, so you'll text me some pictures and you'll give me the lowdown.
I'll take a sign for you.
Not a lot of noise as far as protests coming up. I'm kind of surprised about that. That's vastly different than the first time around, but we'll see how it all unfolds.
Yeah.
Also, the confirmation hearings are going on, and all the same tribalism we talked about with California is inverse and on display on the confirmation hearings.
Well, there is going to be the People's March, right? You heard about that, right?
I did not hear about that. No,
well,
I'm not on their mailing list. Sorry.
No, in 2016, when Trump was inaugurated the first time, there was the Women's March, but they've changed the name of the Women's March to the People's March because we don't really know what women are. So, but literally, they've changed it from Women's March to People's March. So that's going to be happening. I might go watch that. I don't know.
Okay. Well, I'm sure you and I will have plenty to talk about next week after the inauguration.
I'm sure we will.
I didn't mention this earlier, but just for those listening, again, Dave and I are just trying to explain to Kenny G, a guy who lives 60, 70 years in the future of Generation Gamma, hence the name Kenny G, who will be a mid 40s adult by around 2090 or something like that. We're just trying to explain to people of that generation what this moment is like, as they will undoubtedly look back and wonder what the hell was going on with these people around this time, all these catastrophes and chaos and whatever, and country coming apart in various different ways. So as Dave said in the beginning, if you think we got something right, you think we got something wrong, it is worth noting. We'd love to get your perspective. You can do that at unsilentpodcast.com, or Rumble has a great comment section. You can leave us a note there and explain to Kenny G what we missed and what we got right. So anything else, Dave?
Nope, that'll do it.
All right. Well, until next time, this is Dave and Brian signing off.
See you next week.
Do you want to be unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.